On. Hola. Hello. How are you? Let's try to get a nice setting here. That looks pretty okay. Hello, hello, hello. I know. It's late. I know. It's heading toward midnight. But I am here, and that's all that matters. Sorry that it's taken so long, but I am here now. Yay. And we are here right now in this video to do Job chapter, 29, 30, 31, and 32. So we're doing Job 29 through 32 in this video. Job 29 through 32 in this video, which is going to catch us up a little bit more. So I'll give it maybe just a minute or so to see if anyone else is coming on, and then we're just going to go ahead and get started. It was a beautiful day at church today. Absolutely awesome, actually, all the way around. And I was very happy and excited to be at service. Very happy and excited to be at service today. The Spirit of God was really, really in the place today, and I'm very excited about that. Let's go ahead and get started. It's been, let's see, I don't know. Yeah, it's been a couple of minutes of waiting. So we are, again, going over Job 29, 30, 31, and 32 today. And when we left off yesterday, Job was talking in chapter 28. Two of his three friends had done their third speeches, and his last friend, Zophar, did not even speak a third time. So Zophar only has two speeches in there. And then Job just sort of begins responding to them in chapter 26, and he's been talking ever since, right? And so the last thing he talked about in Job 28 was about wisdom and where does it come from. And it's this beautiful poetic discourse in chapter 28 talking about wisdom and where you can and cannot find it. And so we pick up in 29 with, after that beautiful chapter 28, Job is sort of lamenting more in chapter 29, and he's lamenting about days that have gone on, or past times, past days. He's talking a lot about what his life used to be like and how he longed for that to return. And so let's just read just a little bit of it, right? It says in chapter 29, verse 2, How I long for the months gone by, for the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone on my head, and by his light I walked through darkness. Oh, for the days when I was in my prime, when God's intimate friendship blessed my house, when the Almighty was still with me, and my children were around me, when my path was drenched with cream, and the rock poured out for me streams of olive oil. And so, as you can see, Job is talking about those days, what it was like before he started going through, what it was like before all of this calamity had come upon his life. But one of the things that Job says, and remember I said when you're reading the book of Job, it's important to know that Job is speaking out of pain. And Job is speaking without the full knowledge of what's going on, unlike us when we have read chapters 1 and 2 and have access to knowing that God never left Job. Job thinks that God has walked away from him, and so he's longing for God to come back when God never left him, right? Job didn't realize that God was still watching over him. You remember the enemy wanted free reign to do whatever in Job's life, and God said you can do it. You can even touch his body, but don't kill him, right? And so God still had his hand on Job. It just didn't feel like it to Job because of everything that Job was going through. but God definitely was still watching over him. Um, then if you skip down to verse, let's see, we'll start at verse 7. He starts to talk about what it was like, how people used to treat him, and he misses how people used to treat him, right? And so it says in verse 7, when I went to the gate of the city and took my seat in the public square, the young men saw me and stepped aside, and the old men rose to their feet. The chief men refrained from speaking and covered their mouths with their hands. The voices of the nobles were hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouth. Whoever heard me spoke well of me, and those who saw me commended me. And so Job is saying, when I walked into the room, everything stopped. There used to be this commercial back in the day, and I'm showing my age on this one, I know. But it was about E.F. Hutton, and the whole commercial was about when E.F. Hutton walked in the room, just silence overcame the room, right? Because he was so important. This was how Job was saying, when I came around, people knew what I said was worth hearing. So people would stop talking. They would stand up. They would welcome me. And Job is saying he's missing that notoriety that he used to have. And then if you can remember back in Eliphaz's third speech, he started going off on Job, saying all the things that Job wasn't doing, and how Job had all this money but wasn't helping the poor, in essence, was Eliphaz's speech. And so in verse 12, Job begins to address that. And he addresses it here, and then in a few subsequent chapters, he actually brings it back up again, just to let you know, like, what Eliphaz was saying was not true. And so in verse 12, he says, because I rescued the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to assist them. Job is saying this is why people respected me. People respected me because I did the right thing, not just because I had money, not just because I had riches and wealth and fame, which is what Eliphaz was insinuating. Job is saying, no, people respected me because I did the right thing with the money that I had, right? And he said, because I rescued the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to assist them. The one who was dying blessed me. I made the widow's heart sing. I put on righteousness as my clothing. Justice was my robe and my turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy. I took up the case of the stranger. I broke the fangs of the wicked and snatched the victims from their teeth. And so Job is saying, I don't know what Eliphaz was talking about, but I did the right thing with my money. Now, it does sound, a little arrogant the way you read it, right? Job is like, look at everything that I have done. But when you put it in the context of others have said you didn't do any of those things, and in fact, you did this, it kind of makes sense that Job would speak up and defend himself in this and say, look at these things that I've done. So it makes it a little less arrogant. But if you just read it at face value and you don't know anything else that's going on, it's like, man, he's real arrogant about it, right? In chapter 30, he kind of picks up from here. And then begins to talk about the opposite. So remember, chapter 29 is about him longing to return to those days where things just went well, where things were just good for him. Chapter 30, he begins to talk about, but then now this is what's going on, right? And so it starts off in verse 30, but now they mock me. Men younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to put with my sheepdogs. So this was interesting to me because in chapter 29, he's talking about how the older men just looked up to him and revered him, and the younger men looked up to him and revered him, right? Now he's saying young ones are disrespecting him, and even fathers who were so at a low state that he would not have even put them in the same pen as his sheepdogs. In other words, they were like nobodies, is what he's saying. They're actually mocking him now. And so Job is showing in this real poetic dichotomy the two different worlds that he is living in. in just the span of months, right? We know that it's just been a few months because remember in chapter 29, he says, how I long for the months gone by. So it doesn't tell us exactly how many months, but we know that this isn't years that he lived in this state. This is months right now. For us, you may have thought that it was a much longer time, right? But then you have to really think about Job. And can you imagine going through all that Job went through in a span of months, like lose everything? And you may say, oh man, that was just months. But when you're in it, you don't know that it's going to be over, right? Remember, we've already read scriptures where Job has just said, kill me, take me. I'd rather not have been born. Can you let this go? Can you take me out of here quickly, right? Because he did not know how soon it would be over, right? So right now, all we know that it's been a span of months. And now that he's there, people are mocking him, right? He says the haggard, verse 3, the haggard from want and hunger, they roam the parched land and desolate wastelands. He's talking about the kind of people that's mocking him now. In the brush, they gather saw herbs, and their food was the root of the broom brush. They were banished from human society, shouted at as if they were thieves. They were forced to live in the dry stream beds, among the rocks and in the holes in the ground. They brayed among the bushes and huddled in the undergrowth, a base and nameless brood. They were driven out of the land. And now those young men mock me in song. And so Job is like, they're like, you know, the low of the low, right? They're, you know, they hide their holes in the earth because they can't be seen by men, but yet and still they're making up songs that mock me, right? And so Job is to that realization that how far he has fallen, right? In his own mind, he's coming to the realization, like, wow, you know, the people that I used to think of with disdain are now mocking me, right? And just imagine that, you know, I often imagine what it's like when people are going through, and I've seen pastors and ministers go through some really horrendous things where they were up at the top and then all of a sudden something happens and it puts them at the bottom, and it makes you think, unless you got God in your life, you're not going to make it through something like that, right? Because God is the only one that can keep you in a situation like that. And it was really Job's faith, just those little tinges of light and faith that we saw in previous chapters. Like he said, you know, all my appointed days, I'm going to wait until my change come. Or like he says, you know, though I be tested, I'm going to come out as pure gold, right? Though he slay me, yet will I trust him, right? It's those little nuggets of faith that Job is able to muster up and say that has been keeping him, even when he comes to the realization of how many people, how many haters he got, right? How many haters have jumped on the bandwagon since he has fallen into such misfortune. And the rest of chapter 30 talks about how broken he feels and how he's crying out for God and he's hearing no answer, right? Verse 20 says, I cry out to you, God, but you do not answer. I stand up, but you merely look at me. You turn on me ruthlessly. With the might of your hand, you attack me. You snatch me up and drive me before the wind. You toss me about in the storm. I know you will bring me down to the depth, to the place appointed for all the living. And so Job is like, God, I'm trying. I'm calling out. I can't hear you. What is going on? And he thinks that the only end he has is death after all of this. And in verse 24, he says, surely no one lays a hand on a broken man when he cries for help in his distress. Have I not wept for those in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? Yet when I hoped for good, evil came. When I looked for light, then came darkness. And so you could just hear, even in the poetic nature of what he's saying, and the beautiful ways that he's putting it together, how he's contrasting light and darkness, and how he's contrasting how he used to weep for others, and now no one's weeping for him, right? He's really going through, and you can really see it coming out. And then finally in chapter 31, this will be the last time that we will hear Job speak in the book of Job. Chapter 31 is sort of his last speech. And he's talking a lot about a lot of different things here. He starts with talking about how he made a covenant to God pretty much that he was not going to do evil things. And he poetically writes like in a way that says, if you can find something that I've done, please show me, right? And so it's like a sort of a sarcastic way of saying, I haven't done these things, guys, right? So listen, verse 5, he says, if I have walked with falsehood, or my foot has hurried after deceit, let God weigh me in honest scales, and he will know that I am blameless. If my steps have turned from the path, if my heart has been led by my eyes, or if my hands have been defiled, then may others eat what I have sown, and may my crops be uprooted. If my heart has been enticed by a woman, or if I have lurked at my neighbor's door, then may my wife grind another man's grain. Get your mind off the dirt there. Let my wife grind another man's grain, and may other men sleep with her. For that would have been wicked, a sin to be judged. It is a fire that burns to destruction. It would have uprooted my harvest. If I have denied justice to any of my servants, whether male or female, when they had a grievance against me, what will I do when God confronts me? What will I answer when called to account? Did not he who made me in the womb make them? Did not the same one form us both within our mothers? And so he's saying here, listen, I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't done anything wrong. And so he's given all these different scenarios. And he goes on and on like this. Hi, Toya. He goes on and on like this, saying in verse 17, if I have kept my bread to myself, not sharing it with the fathers, but from my youth I reared them as a father would, and from my birth I guided the widow. Verse 21, he says, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless, knowing that I had influence in court, then let my arm fall from the shoulder. Let it be broken off at the joint. He says, for I dreaded destruction, verse 23, from God, and for fear of his splendor, I could not do such things. And so he's, again, putting forth his argument. Hey, guys, I understand that you believe that I am in this state because I deserve to be, because I have done something wrong, right? But I haven't done any of these things that you probably think I've done, right? And, you know, he goes on to talk about if I've trusted in riches. And he just starts naming all kinds of things that he could have done wrong, or that he may think that his friends think that he has done wrong. And he's just refuting them thing by thing. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. I didn't do this. And if you think I did it, then let this happen, right? And so at the end of chapter 31, he says his last words, verse 35, says, oh, that I had someone to hear me. I sign now my defense. Let the Almighty answer me. Let my accuser put his indictment in writing. Surely I would wear it on my shoulder. I would put it on like a crown. I would give him an account of my every step. I would present it to him as to a ruler. And so Job is saying, look, I put forth my defense. I have said everything that I could possibly say to get you guys to believe, and to get God to know that I have not done anything that brought me to this state. And basically after that, Job says a few more words. And then, it's sort of like he rests his case. He doesn't say anything else in the book of Job. Now, In chapter 32 enters a brand new character. His name is Elihu. At least that's how we're going to pronounce it. I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. I should have went and checked that out before I opened my mouth to say how I was saying it in my brain. But we're going to call him Elihu. Elihu, how about that? Elihu is what we're going to call him. And Elihu is come on the scene. We don't know where he came from. It sounds like he's been there for a while. He's been listening to the three friends, but we don't know at what point he entered into the conversation. Did he come in the beginning when Job first started talking, right after the 7 days of silence? Was he there from the entire beginning, or did he come in during the first round of conversation, or the second round of conversation, or the third round of conversation? It doesn't really say where he entered. We just know that he's been there because he has heard some of what's going on. And when we're reading about Elihu, and I think he spans about 5 chapters, he has the longest discourse of anybody, even God, in this book, right? You're going to see that he is just very wordy. He's one of those people that's very verbose. All of us know somebody, right, who just can talk and talk and talk. I mean, he spends this whole first chapter of 32 telling you that he's getting ready to tell you something. Like, that's all chapter 32 says. It's like, I'm about to talk, y'all. And when I talk, ooh, wait till y'all hear what I'm about to say. And I'm about to say, ooh, just wait, just wait. I mean, that's basically what chapter 32 is saying. In there, he's talking about Job, and he's talking about Job's friends, and he's talking about how angry he is with everybody, right? So he starts off saying, I didn't want to talk, right? I didn't think it was my place to talk at first because I'm younger. So one thing that we have learned about Elihu is that he's must be significantly younger than the other men, because he says for respect reasons, he had not spoken up to this point. And so he waited for everybody to be silent before he spoke. So in Jewish culture especially, that would imply that he was significantly younger than the men who were there, for him not to even feel like he had a place to talk until everyone else stopped talking. But then in verse, let's first say verse 8, he tells them, but it is the spirit in a person, the breath of the Almighty, that gives them understanding. And I'm making that our memory verse. Chapter 32, verse 8 will be our memory verse. Chapter 32, verse 8 will be our memory verse, because he's right? It doesn't mean just because you're elder in age that you automatically have wisdom, right? And it doesn't mean because you're young in age that you don't have wisdom, right? And so this is a true statement. He says, but it is the spirit in a person, the breath of the Almighty, that gives them understanding. And we already read in our last video, right, that it is the fear of the Lord that is the beginning of wisdom, and that it is shunning evil that gives you understanding, right? And so he's definitely right. Just because he's young doesn't mean that he doesn't have wisdom. But what we're going to find is that his wisdom is no different than the other three. Once we get down through all the words that he speaks, he pretty much says the same thing. And so, again, this whole chapter is just saying, listen to me. I'm about to talk. I'm about to bust. I got so much to say. Wait till I say it. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Wait till I tell you what I got to tell you. You going to want to hear what I got to tell you. And don't you not listen to me, because I ain't told you yet. But I'm about to tell. I mean, that's really what chapter 32 is all about. So if you haven't read it, read it for yourself. And that's basically what he's saying. In our next video, is he going to talk like that for a little while longer, and then you're going to get down to the nitty gritty of what he's really trying to say. But until next time, just know that God is wonderful. He is great and greatly to be praised. And that I love you and God loves you too. In Jesus' name, you be blessed. Amen.